thing we have to fear is
in war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
You found your way to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. Thank you for joining us today. You can visit us online at wallbuilders.com and wallbuilderslive.com. David, we've been doing for several years now interviews with veterans that have served us. Most of those interviews have been with World War II veterans, been able to capture some really amazing guys. We've done a few on Vietnam, but there's one war we really don't talk about much at all, and I don't think we've had a veteran on this one yet.
Korean War. And there may be a reason they call that the Forgotten War.
Yeah.
The number of casualties was pretty comparable to Vietnam. But Vietnam was a political war that was really unpopular. And that's why we remember it so much. But the Korean War, these are guys who served with the same kind of honor that was there with World War II vets. And they were still appreciated before people turned on the military in Vietnam. They were still appreciated, but just nobody thinks about them. And it was a very difficult war, and especially the circumstances. It was really considered a police action rather than a war. It was one of the things that the UN got involved with, and the UN was supposed to prevent all future wars after World War II. That was going to be the Treaty of Versailles with World War I, and here came the UN. And it didn't work out that way, and it hasn't worked out that way. But nonetheless, what happened, and I think people don't even know the history of Korea, but in 1910, Korea was really a territory of Japan. The Japanese had taken Korea. And so Korea belonged to Japan, and they ruled it with an iron fist. And just as you had an emperor over Japan, that meant an emperor over Korea. Well, once we defeat the Japanese at the end of World War II, all the holdings of Japan no longer are the holdings of Japan. So now Korea is suddenly free from Japanese control. Well, we send World War troops in for occupation, and they're to occupy all these German places and these Japanese places until we can get government set up and get the economy back and going. And that was what happened to Korea. And so with the treaty that ended there in the 1940s, where they settled all the disputes with all the Axis countries and the Allied countries, they, at that time, drew a parallel across there and divided Korea into two parts, North and South Korea, in that 38th parallel. And so still one country with two parts, but what happened up in the North, you had the communists from China and the communists from Stalin, the Russians, that started supplying those people with lots of communistic propaganda, for one, but also with lots of military equipment. Now, Koreans hadn't had military equipment because they were under Japan. Japan was the master. And so up north, now suddenly they're getting all this military equipment, they're getting all this military might, and the North comes against the South. And the South was the non-communist area. So
let me ask you real quick, though, in terms of splitting it, is that kind of like, is that somewhat like, Berlin and Germany being split, so you had some areas that the Americans were influencing with our way of life in terms of free enterprise and that sort of thing, and then you had other areas being influenced by communism and more of a tyrannical government. Same thing was happening in
East
Korea.
Germany, West Germany, East Berlin, West Berlin, same thing happening there. And so when those in North Korea, the communists, decided they didn't want to be satisfied with what they have, they wanted it all, they came charging into the American and the peace-loving side, really the UN side of Korea, which is South Korea. Then the UN brought all these forces to bear. Well, just like it is in every UN conflict, it's primarily Americans that get involved. And so that's what it was in the Korean War, or the police action, the UN police action in Korea, it's a full-fledged war. And it's Americans having to take on fully equipped communists being supplied by both China and by Stalin out of Russia. So it's kind of like America versus China and Russia. And it was a vicious war. It was not the Koreans themselves, per se. I mean, they were the ones using the weapons. But they had just come out of this huge time of poverty and slavery, and they didn't have the weapons. They were being supplied by the others. So when you talk about the Korean War, it really is kind of a continuation of World War II in some ways, but it really is the start of the Cold War, because it's America against communists. Communists are attacking us. They're coming against freedom. They're coming against peace-loving people. They're not respecting their treaties. And that's
what's
where
at
this
stake
comes.
now is whether just North Korea will remain communism and South Korea be able to be free, or will communism take over the whole area?
The whole peninsula. And this was really a battle to stop communists and respect the treaties that had been signed there at the end of World War II.
Well, one of our Korean War veterans is going to be with us when we come back from the break, Corporal Jack Kilpatric. Stay with us here on WallBuilders Live. Red, White, Blue, and Green is a new reality show following the Green family around the nation, rediscovering the American principles that made us the most successful nation in the history of the world. You can be a part of launching this new reality series by visiting rickgreen.com and clicking on the Red, White, Blue, and Green tab. Here's a sneak peek from the pilot episode. Rick Green coming to you live from the Lone Star State of Texas, a beacon of hope and freedom to liberty lovers around the world. Today I'm thinking about why do we do what we do? Because everywhere we go as a family, when we're traveling and speaking, someone comes up to us and asks, where's the hope? Is it over for America? They genuinely feel like the stars and stripes are fading. I felt that. But when I look at my family, whether it's my son Trey and his drive to exceed expectations, or Reagan and his love for serving and teaching other people, Cameron and her determination to outperform her brothers in everything she does, or my little stagehound Rhett and his boundless enthusiasm. Through their eyes, I see a vibrant nation. When my children stand in the birthplace of the Constitution, or on battlefields where patriots gave their lives, I can see in them a rekindled flame of the American spirit. The future of my children's country is bright because it's built on the foundation of an incredible providential history. A history of patriots and pastors, entrepreneurs and freedom fighters, mothers, fathers, families like yours and mine, who chose to live like their nation depended on it. And it still does. So when people ask us, where is the hope? We tell them, it's in you. Each of us, every individual, every family, has a duty to fight for freedom and add our voice, our color, to the American dream. For our family, it's red, white, and blue, and a little bit of green. To learn more about Red, White, Blue, and Green, visit rickgreen.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back to the intersection of faith and politics, WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. Our guest today, Corporal Jack Kilpatric, one of our great veterans that served in the Korean War, and he's been gracious enough to spend some time with us today and share his story. Corporal, thank you for coming on, sir.
It's my pleasure to share my story.
Well, we appreciate your time and certainly appreciate your service and being willing to help to defend our nation. And at a young age, you were only, 17 when you enlisted?
That's correct. Shortly after my 17th birthday in 1949, I had made up my mind that a military career was going to be my thing. And so I was sworn into the Army on the 16th of September of 1949.
And you had a pretty rich history in your family of your family members, your father and grandfather and others serving.
That's correct. My grandfather served in the Spanish-American War in Cuba. My father served in World War I in France. My oldest brother, served World War II in Germany. My next oldest brother served. He wasn't quite old enough to make World War II, but he was in occupation forces in Japan. Then my next oldest brother, he retired from the Air Force, serving during the Korean War, but he wasn't there. He served on the Berlin airlift and then Vietnam, and then retired. And then, of course, myself, I served 3 years from 1949 to 1952.
Wow.
Of 1952.
That's quite a family history. So when you went in at 17 years old, now why did you choose Army? I love to pit all the branches against each other. It's fun. So what made you choose Army? It sounded like you had a brother Air Force and everybody else was Army in your family.
Well, I kind of, when I first went in, I had it in mind that I would go into the engineers, the Army engineers. And that's kind of what I had my thoughts on. And after I got in, had my basic training, then I decided to go over into the Army.
All right. So
the infantry. Now,
what was your, so the Korean War had not broken out when you joined. You joined up and it broke out after you were already enlisted, right?
Right. Of course, my thinking back then, that was right at the end of World War II. It was only 5 years after World War II, and of course they had had the atomic bomb and had created this fabulous United Nations that was really going to handle any situation that came up. There wasn't going to be any more war. So having a war was a farthest thing from my mind, when I went in.
Yeah, that didn't last long, did it?
No, I didn't. I had got through my basic training at Fort Riley, Kansas, and I graduated there in December of 1950. And I was then assigned to the 14th Regimental Combat Team that was stationed at Camp Carson, Colorado. And it was a ski troop mountain climbing organization. Had quite a history going back to the 10th Mountain Division during World War II. So I was in that training from January to June of 1950. And, of course, the Korean War broke out June 25 of 1950, and I was immediately, ordered to report to San Francisco and Japan, to join the forces going into Korea. Of course, my experience going to Korea, I went in at the Incheon landing. I don't know how much knowledge that people have of that or anybody else, but that was kind of the big backbreaker operation at the time, at the early part of the war.
We don't, that's the thing. We don't know much. Unfortunately, the Korean War is probably the one we know the least about. It's not talked about much, and frankly, you guys are often overlooked when even I go to veteran ceremonies and things, and I don't understand why it's often the ignored war. You guys aren't honored as much as the others. Part of why we wanted to have you on, or the forgotten war, I guess, is the phrase that people use, but that's why we wanted to honor you. So we want to educate people a little bit about it. So tell us what happened in that invasion.
Well, that's kind of my passion. That's something, in my later years I've gotten through my business career, and now, with a lot of time on my hands, and I really realize, the condition that our country is in and how people do not understand war. They think it's a bad thing, but that's not it. You'll never do away with war. That's the final answer when push comes to shove, and there is no settlement by negotiating. Then it has to resort to force, and that's what war is. So Korea is probably one of the very best countries for people to study. It's a recent history, and it's probably I can't say the most successful, but it certainly was the most successful for South Korea. And a person, studied the war, how it started, going all the way back to when Japan had occupied Korea until we liberated them in 1945 and gave them their freedom. And what people don't understand, when that happened, there was no North or South Korea. There was just Korea, and that people were all the same. They had all been treated horribly by the Japanese. They were very uneducated people. Japan had robbed them of their resources and just absolutely treated the people terribly. They didn't let them speak their own language outside their home. There was no schooling, no infrastructure building. And so there you had a country with no government. And so that's where the North and South Korea came in, is that the allies, Russia and the United States, basically, said, well, what do we do with Korea? And it was decided that they would divide it there at the 38th parallel, which is, equal as far as terrain goes and geography. And so Russia installed this beautiful communism stuff into North Korea, and we helped South Korea establish a democracy, an elected government a constitutional government based pretty much just like ours.
And free enterprise. What a difference.
Exactly. Yeah. And today, what people need to do is, the Korean War was never signed. A peace treaty was never signed. It was only a ceasefire, and that's been going on for the past 64 years now. And so the place is still a very volatile place. could break out in war at any time. You got the folks up north who do their thing, a totally complete anarchy, closed society, and then you have about the freedom of South Korea. And what a lot of people probably don't have a clue, that this country went from what I described it earlier about having absolutely nothing, no education, and so forth. Today, about the 10th largest economy in the world.
And just an incredible success.
That's what I say, people, if you really see this as I have seen it, it was just absolutely, it just blew me away. I says, I had no fond memories of Korea. When I was there as a youngster, I was a combat infantry machine gunner, and all the time that I was in Korea, I spent on the front lines. And the weather and all the things that we went through, we had worn out World War II equipment. And, it was just absolutely a nightmare for a soldier, to be in combat in Korea. And so I had no fond memories, but I guess about the best thing that happened to me is that since 1975, the South Korean government has been hosting return visits to a veteran who fought for them, during the period of June 25, 1950 and October of 1954. They take us back over there, all at their expense, and show us around for 6 days. They put us up, just absolutely treat us royally. When I went back there the first time after 54 years and saw what I saw, I said, that was just absolutely unbelievable. It just totally blew me away. I said, there's no way that these people could go from what I knew to this in 54 years. It was just absolutely amazing. And I got to go back to Incheon and Seoul. Those were my battlefields. That's where I entered the war. So I knew that country like the back of my hand. And that airport there at Incheon is built right there in the mudflats today as one of the most beautiful modern airports in the world. And you go into Seoul, we had totally and completely blew that city apart. It was just nothing but rubble. Today, it's probably the most beautiful city in the world.
I am so glad that you shared this the way that you did. I most of the time when we do these programs, we talk about the things that happened in war, and there's a story to be told there, no doubt. But your perspective on why war happens, and on the difference between the principles that were planted in South Korea and the principles that were planted in North Korea, that it is critical that Americans hear what you're talking about right now, because seeing that difference, that it really does matter, the foundations of the type of government and free enterprise system versus communism that's planted, and seeing the difference in North Korea and South Korea now. I got to ask you, Corporal, how much, a lot of times I talk to veterans and they don't necessarily know if what they did made a difference. When you go back over there and see that, how does that make you feel to know that when you went there and risked your life and saw others die?
That just changed my whole life.
Yeah.
It changed my whole life because I suffered a lot. I lost a lot of comrades there. Very, very close comrades. And, it was just absolutely, I had no fond memories of all.
Yeah.
It was, to me, when I was in Korea, it was absolutely nothing but misery. I nearly froze to death. it was just, I was out in that 24/7, and the weather during that, the winter of 1950 and 51, it was like between 0 during the day and up to 40 below 0 at night. And we were out in that with absolutely no shelter, 24/7. Our food, we ate out of a sea ration and frozen. So if you can imagine how cold and miserable that is, under those conditions, you can see why I had no fond memories of Korea.
Yeah.
And then go back over there and see how them people how they feel about it. I mean, they just absolutely love us. And I mean, they just go to. There's so many things that that they have done. It's it's hard for me to sit here and tell you how great those people are as far as to we veterans that fought for them.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Well, and now it's America's turn to learn from them. I mean, now it's our turn to say, look, when the seeds of liberty are planted and you foster free enterprise and you live by those principles, look at the prosperity and look how it changed their country. Now that our country is slowly slipping towards tyranny and slipping away from those constitutional principles and free enterprise principles you were talking about, we need to look back at what you guys did to make it possible for them to live free and say, why in the world would we not want to keep that here in America?
That's my thought exactly. And of course that's why I have this very passion, to speak about it. Now I have. And in the process of putting together a program on this.
Oh, that's great.
And, it's very, very descriptive of what I done in Korea. I have a lot of pictures, everything of when I was over there and that type of thing, and progress that on through it to where people can see with their own eyes. This is what happened. It's not a bunch of propaganda and so forth that I'm spreading here. I mean, this is the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that means you're not done fighting, Corporal. You now it's time to fight on this end of the fight and right here in our homeland to educate and to talk about these principles. I love the fact that you've got this passion, that you understand what's at stake here in our own country, and you understand what it was that you were fighting for back then. And I'm so glad that our listeners got to hear from you today and that we have the chance to visit with you. I appreciate you, brother. Thank you for first of all, for being willing to endure what you endured back then at such a young age. But for now, do you mind if I ask you how old you are today?
I'm working on 82. I'll be 82 years of age in August.
82. So now at 82, still fighting for freedom.
I'm in pretty good shape. I'm an octogenarian pilot. I still fly a little private airplane, and I'm still pretty active.
That's great. That's great. Well, I'm telling you, our nation still needs you, sir. Absolutely. I'm so glad you're putting that presentation together. I hope that you'll be able to share it with folks all over the place and help to wake up Americans to understand how precious freedom is and how these principles do work. Corporal, thank you so much for your service to our country, and thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity.
That's Corporal Jack Kilpatric, back in a moment with David Barton.
I'm Professor Radisson. This is Philosophy 150. Fill in the papers I've just given you with 3 little words. God is dead.
When your faith is tested, would you fight for what you believe?
I actually believe in God.
To me, he's not dead. He's alive.
God's not dead. He's surely alive.
God's Not Dead, the movie. Join the movement at the box office and say, God's not dead. He's surely alive. Now playing. Rated PG. For more information, go to godsnotdeadthemovie.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Special thanks to Corporal Jack Kilpatric. David, we've had a lot of great interviews with veterans. That was one of the best for a lot of reasons. He just gave us a lesson on the difference between freedom and free enterprise versus communism and tyranny.
And I want to back up and take a little tidbit real quick off something he said that I think passed because, again, it's a forgotten word. Nobody knows what he's talking about. But he talks about the Incheon landing. And Incheon landing was actually the Battle of Incheon, and that was in 1950, right when this thing was getting started, because the Korean War goes to about 53. So at the beginning, the communist troops had overrun and taken over the South. And so the UN forces came in with a massive amphibious landing, kind of like D-Day, 261 naval vessels, 75,000 troops landed, American troops, wow. UN troops, and pushed the North Koreans back into the North. And so that was really what started the thing, was getting the South Koreans getting the North Koreans out of the South Koreans' territory, getting the communists back in the North. And then they fought for 3 years to keep them there because the communists kept trying to take over the South again. So that's where he was. And so he was talking about being on the front lines there for almost 2 years, being a machine gunner on the front lines. And you think about going through winter. Battle of the Bulge was hard on World War II soldiers, but Korea was colder than Battle of the Bulge. and they're there without any winter gear, without any winter equipment. They're exposed for all that time. The weather casualties in the Korean War were massive. So there he is, and as he said, he has no fond memories of Korea.
Yeah.
I mean, none.
He said it several times. I mean,
he did.
You could tell.
He lost his buddies there. No shelter, no protection. 0 to 40 below every day. The food is frozen, so he couldn't even eat the food. But now he goes back over there, and he's a hero to those guys.
Yeah.
And the way the South Koreans treat him, because they recognize liberty. And he's right, man. It's the 10th largest economy in the world now. It's the size of New Jersey and has an economy that is the 10th largest in the world because of freedom. That's what. And he's exactly right. That you talked about the free market system, the free enterprise system. It was a perfect lesson on keeping government out of those areas.
Yeah.
And the Koreans appreciate what the Korean vets did. We don't do much for them here in America.
But we should.
Boy, those people who have lived freedom, lived free, because of what folks like Jack did, kudos to them.
You could hear it in his voice.
Oh, you could, man.
Hear the fact that he knew that his service and his sacrifice was for a purpose and that it made a difference.
That's right.
He was able to go back and see the difference between freedom and tyranny because he had been willing. You could tell the connection in his own life. He had been willing to fight on those front lines, and now people live in freedom as a result of it. And you could tell he wanted us to learn here in America.
That's right.
Because he could see our nation going the way of North Korea instead of South Korea.
And if you're a Korean War vet, thank you. You're not forgotten.
Amen.
We appreciate you guys. Thanks for what you did for so many others.
And special thanks to Corporal Jack Kilpatric for being with us. Thanks for joining us today on WallBuilders Live.